What if the key to unlocking your team's full potential isn't about hiring more talent, but creating an environment where every voice is heard and diverse perspectives thrive? In today's episode, I'm speaking with Sabrin Chowdhury, Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity at PIMCO. And we're going to be discussing how inclusive cultures fuel innovation, improve business outcomes, and help organizations retain top talent. She'll share practical strategies leaders can implement today, from micro inclusions that drive macro impact to rethinking workplace culture in a way that truly empowers employees. This conversation really struck a chord with me. As someone who has worked in financial services myself, I know firsthand how critical it is for companies to foster environments where women and underrepresented professionals can truly thrive. Sabrin's insights are game-changing, and I can't wait for you to hear them. Before we do dive in though, a quick favour. If you have loved these episodes and want to support our mission to bring you conversations with top people and culture leaders and experts, please subscribe, leave a review and share this podcast with your network. Your support means everything. Now, without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Sabrin Chowdhury. Enjoy. Hi Sabrin, welcome to the All Inclusive Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to speak today.
Yeah, same. So let's start. Can you share with our audience a little bit more about your journey into DEI leadership and what actually led you to focus on building inclusive cultures in the workplace?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say it definitely was not a linear journey and not one that I expected to be in. I started my career, interestingly, in financial services at Lehman Brothers in a very interesting time. I started right before the global financial crisis. When I started my career, I felt that I didn't really see a lot of senior women in roles that I could look up to. And I felt that there wasn't a lot of focus on inclusive leadership in the industry. And I ended up leaving the industry in a few years and went to graduate school, where I got my MBA and master's in public policy, and spent a lot of time really learning about what makes good leadership practices, and what makes up a good workplace culture. And then from there, I went on to McKinsey, where I was for about 9 years. And the bulk of my career at McKinsey was really focused on learning about organizational health and how it truly is the motivating kind of lever in making organizations thrive across industries, and really linchpin in which strategy is really implemented. And so, in doing the work around organizational health, it really helped me kind of lean into inclusion and really see how inclusive cultures really unlock productivity in people and in organizations as well, which kind of brought me to the work that I do now and has really allowed me to kind of lean in and believe in how important inclusive culture is to a workplace, and how every organization should be embracing it as they think about their own strategy and their own business goals as well.
Well, I mean, I can totally resonate with that starting career in financial services, because I was also the same. And yeah, it's an industry in particular that I think it's difficult to see women in senior positions, especially in the earlier years. Like we're talking kind of like a significant a couple years back, and even now, actually. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some really good female leaders out there working in financial services, and I love that, and I love to see more, and I hope to see more females climb the ladder also. In order to do that, I think organizations really need to understand how they can better unlock their workforce potential. And so how does workplace culture play a role in actually making that a reality?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the most important part of it is, you can bring in as many people as you want with diversity of thought, but if you're not making them feel heard and have a seat at the table, you're not really going to capture their ideas and unlock each individual's potential. And I think that's the most important piece that I find has been a big shift in terms of organizations really understanding that the more that you're able to create an inclusive culture, and by an inclusive culture, we mean one where everybody is able to share their ideas, everybody feels that they're able to bring their authentic professional self to work, and feels comfortable in voicing all kinds of creativity, that you're able to really bring a diverse perspective of ideas, and that allows you to have greater client impact as well, and allows you to really be able to deliver more for your client. So, what does that actually look like? It means it doesn't actually really mean really big things all the time. We always talk about, and this is one of the things that we talk about at PIMCO, is that micro inclusions can have a macro impact in terms of productivity and in terms of workplace impact. And what we mean by that is even small things like in a meeting, if the senior person speaks last and make sure that everybody else voices their perspective so as not to kind of anchor people's opinions. That goes a long way. Or as a leader, if you are making sure that you are grabbing coffee with people you don't usually speak to, or team members, or people outside your team, or mentoring or speaking with people who are usually or maybe not in your networks, that goes a long way as well. And so oftentimes I think we anchor on these maybe big programs or doing things every 3 to 6 months. And that I think sometimes is taxing to organizations, right? Because there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it. And it feels heavy and burdensome for leaders. And there's a lot of momentum required, and then it fizzles out. But focusing on the micro day to day actually ends up creating more sustainable impact and feelings of inclusivity, which helps people to really speak up, and helps embed it more in kind of like the fabric of the organization and the DNA of the organization, which in turn makes people comfortable and engages people. And the research that shows allows people to stay at an organization longer as well.
I totally agree, and I love that it's like micro steps, sorry, micro steps, macro impact. I love that. I think that's such a great take, and I know I do hear from leaders again, and I don't want to discount this 3 6 month initiatives. I think they're great and they're important, and
Absolutely.
it is needed. But also, I feel like we're missing the value in actually those smaller steps, and those smaller steps are ones that anyone can really take forward and implement in their day-to-day job. And like you said, it's a lot harder to unravel that, those micro steps, than it is these kind of 3 6 month big initiatives, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it also, as I mentioned, sometimes we'll hear from, not just at my organization, I've seen this in other organizations. It can sometimes feel burdensome to managers in terms of like, it feels like a heavy lift, but it's not really a heavy lift when you integrate it into like one or two things you can do. In my previous role, for instance, there were things that we called nudges. So like, there are one or two nudges that you can do in your daily role, whether to be reminding your team to, make sure that everyone in the team speaks up at a team meeting. Or making sure that before you go to a team meeting, you have good meeting hygiene in terms of like having a set meeting agenda, and making sure that like you're really clear on the goals and outcomes. And again, making sure that everyone's perspectives are heard. Or then one that comes up a lot in terms of like, frankly, like women not getting like credit, or things like that, amplifying voices, and not just women. It could be people who are extroverts versus introverts, like making sure someone gets the credit when they like make the point and aren't spoken over. So things like that and common practices like that get repeated become part of like the behavior of the team, and feel and like you said, of course, those 3 month, 6 month programs are super important. But I think plus the nudges, plus like the micro behavioral pieces, really allows it to kind of get embedded in your day to day. So it's not something that you have to think about. It's almost automatically part of your behavior.
Mm. So we've talked about kind of small steps in trying to create this inclusive culture. Um, and you've touched on it a little bit earlier in conversation as well, diversity of thought. And I think diversity of thought is one that for me really is a cornerstone when we're talking about inclusive culture. So how does diversity of thought really contribute to making sure that we can have innovation in the work. We can kind of really push our workforce to their fullest potential whilst and still being able to get the great business outcomes that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. We had in November we had our first ever our PIMCO multicultural group hosted our first ever PIMCO concert internally with in partnership with the Pacific Symphony. And it was interesting to quote one of our senior leaders. He made a comment on how, every instrument is so beautiful on its own. But when you bring each kind of different instrument together, and the full orchestra, the symphony that it creates is just incredible. And that's kind of how you think about diversity of thought. Each person, as they bring their unique perspective, when you bring it together, the kind of creativity and innovation that it brings and kind of pushes each other and unlocks the potential of thinking in each other is when you're really able to push the thinking and push the boundaries and growth of what's possible. And we in financial services, we it's kind of like the most simplistic of ideas, right? Diverse portfolios allow you to have the greatest returns, and so when you have diverse thinking, it allows you to have the greatest impact and greatest innovation. And so the kind of the symphony analogy, maybe it's a little bit too simplistic, but when you have people from like the same groups or the same colleges or the same backgrounds, it really stunts and there's so much research around this in terms of groupthink, in terms of the biases that people go towards. Like it does stunt your innovation, right? It stunts like your decision making and leads you to like the same patterns and behaviors. But when you have diversity of thought, people challenging each other, one of the things, for instance, we have at PIMCO is every quarter we have a forum, and it's really focused on bringing in not only internally, all our experts, but external experts to talk, to debate the markets. It's all about debate and disagreement on talking to each other about diversity of thought. And so all that to say is without diversity of thought, you won't have innovation. You won't be able to push yourselves and be able to deliver better results for your clients or for your external stakeholders, for your internal stakeholders. There won't be growth. And I think there's, again, been enough research to highlight how important diversity of thought and cognitive diversity also it really is. And so that's something that we really believe in, and I think there's enough research to highlight that and how important it is. And I think when you marry diversity of thought in an inclusive environment, that's just like magnifying all the magic, because not only do you have diversity of thought, you have an environment where people feel that they can actually show up with their diversity of thought and share all their ideas. And that's when you have the incredible unlock of people's true potential as well, and the potential of being able to share all those ideas and really be able to, unlock full creativity as well.
I totally agree, and I think you touched on something that I just want to delve a little bit deeper into, like this idea of like having a debate, because I think it's all good and well to have people on side and everyone is in agreement with um, the great success of having diversity of thought, but with that does also come the fact that there will be others in the room that disagree. That's the whole point, right? Is that people think about things differently. And I think it's important that as a skill set, we all learn to be able to have a debate and have a conversation where there are different perspectives and still respectfully kind of work towards all together towards the same goal, if that makes sense, right? So it's great that you guys have kind of recognized that and are really making sure that you're creating space or events which showcase that this is what we want to do, this is the direction that we're going in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it's a important skill set to learn early on in your career as well, to kind of recognize that there are multiple perspectives or viewpoints to an idea and be able to challenge it and be able to look at it in different ways. And so it's something that I've come to very much enjoy and look forward to whenever the forums take place as well.
Oh, nice. So it's clear fostering inclusion and diversity of thought are definitely things that are needed in an organization, and it is something that is going to require like ongoing effort to make sure that it is a success. It's not going to be a check the box exercise. With that though, I know one challenge many leaders come across, which we talk about when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion overall, is that unconscious bias, and I know you touched on it a little bit as well. So can you share with us, like, how does unconscious bias really show up in the workplace when it comes to when we talk about work and when we talk about ensuring that we have diversity of thought? What's the barrier there with unconscious bias?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say everyone has bias. Like, it exists, and in no way is there will we ever be able to. The focus is not on eliminating bias, because we all have biases. That's the way that our brains are wired, and so the focus is really more around how can you recognize the biases that you have and be able to manage them. And so I think really framing it is in terms of it's bias is not. I think for a while there was this rhetoric around bias equals bad and how can we eliminate it. And I think it's really not that. It's everyone has bias, and how do you manage that bias to kind of reframe your behavior into positive action. So I think that is really important to frame it in the right way. And then to your specific question, I think once you reframe it in that way, is really recognizing how do you understand bias so you allow for the best type of decision making. And so there are a couple of things that, for instance, we've been doing. One is in terms of bias is what I mentioned in terms of the kind of micro inclusions creating macro impact. So we have worked with, from starting from the top of the house, our senior leaders and cascading down, in talking through different scenarios of like team scenarios that may happen across our different business groups, and tailoring it to those business groups because every business is different, and thinking through like what types of like how would you handle these situations, like what are some biases that may come up, and what are some micro inclusive actions you could take to address those situations, whether it be would this situation be handled better if the senior person spoke last, or if you had paused and listened, or attributed credit, or if you had taken out team members and spoken to them one-on-one. I'm just giving like kind of high level examples, but those sessions, and to your earlier point in terms of having a discussion and seeing a situation through multiple lenses and perspectives, were extremely helpful for senior leaders in kind of really understanding how to think about different biases and how to just think about most importantly, like, what are the tangible actions to take when different scenarios show up. On the other side, we work with our behavioral scientists quite a bit. My team does. And we're actually launching a pilot to think about how you also recognize biases to make sure that you're making the best decisions, especially, for instance, when it comes to in meetings as well. And so one of the things that we're actually just launching this week is thinking through meeting best practices. And when you're in meetings, how to make sure that your biases don't come up, whether it be in like groupthink or in how you receive information and how you're anchoring your decision making as well. And so there's those types of biases as well. And so those are kind of two examples of how we're addressing like the quote unquote biases that may sometimes come up again, but it's about how you kind of recognize the biases and react to it versus like no one will ever be able to eliminate biases completely. I mean, that's not how human behavior works or how the human mind works
Yeah.
for anyone.
Yeah, no, totally. And I totally agree with the point in terms
Mhm.
of there was a time where I think we were very much like bias is bad, like we it
Yeah,
needs to be eliminated. These are the things, these are the 6 steps that need to be taken, or these are the strategies we've implemented to eliminate bias in our workplace. And it just to me seemed very performative in that sense, because we all know that
absolutely.
bias is exists within us and it will always exist within us. But I think it is, as you've said, about recognizing that, doing an internal review of what your own biases may be, how that comes out in the decisions that you make and how you communicate with others, and what you can do differently to try to mitigate that bias and try and ensure that
Absolutely.
you are making a decision that has been you've gotten there in an inclusive way, if that makes sense. So you've talked about what PIMCO is doing to with regards to bias, diversity of thought, and inclusive culture, which is great. I think you guys are definitely one of the organisations for me that I think are kind of really pushing the boundaries and moving forward, especially in the current economic and the landscape that we're living in the world that we're living in right now, and what's coming out in the media when it comes to inclusion and workplace culture. But so it would be great to hear from you, like, how have you felt about leading the charge in workplace culture and inclusivity? Like, how do you continue to stay motivated?
Yeah, to me, it's really exciting to be focused in the space, especially at a place like PIMCO that's very data driven. And this is probably something that people hear often in the space, that what matters gets measured. And one of the things that we've always leaned into. And it's something that I spent time doing at McKinsey as well, is really leaning into the data that's behind inclusion and the data behind workplace culture. So from early on, especially coming into this role, we focused on really first establishing a baseline by launching an inclusion assessment. And that was extremely helpful in terms of having a baseline with data to understand, across our businesses, across our regions, or by, officer title, or and by location, where are we on inclusion and across all the factors. And then just last year, we were able to launch a more holistic, engagement survey that was able to show us where we've made progress across those factors, and then what else we want to do. And so by being so data driven, it's been extremely helpful to be able to use data to share that progress and to assign numbers to what is otherwise sometimes a very kind of intangible, kind of amorphous, for lack of a better word, problem to solve, right? And so I think there's a lot of exciting path forward to inclusion and the connection to productivity that we're about to see, especially with the role of course, with AI coming on. And we're doing more to even link our engagement data to more of the data that we have on hand. And I just think that there is just so much that there is to be done and to understand by linking all these data sets. So I think it's extremely exciting. I also think that there is a lot of like genuine um, leadership belief and understanding in just like how important an inclusive workplace is in unlocking talent. And in financial services, because your talent is your biggest asset, it just gives more credence and importance to that. So all that to say is, I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in the space. There is a lot of innovation happening in terms of being able to use data, being able to use tech, as I mentioned, including AI. And we're just kind of at the tipping point in terms of what all we can do and understand. And there's a lot more to come. With everything, there's of course uh, the pendulum continues to evolve and shift, but I think that's what keeps it exciting. If people are not talking about it, that means it's not exciting. So
Well, I mean, this
I
is
take
it.
that as a
Like,
challenge.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
totally see that as well. I mean, like, if you don't have any haters, then you're doing something wrong. Like, it's that age old
You're not
saying, I think.
relevant. Yeah,
Yeah, you're
exactly.
not relevant. You're not doing something relevant. So yeah, I think I agree. I'm really excited about what's to come in the future, and that actually does help to keep me motivated in continuing this work, because I can see that there's so much more to come and a lot is on the horizon. So for leaders that are listening today, like, who want to make sure that their workforce is kind of future proof their workforce, what advice would you give them?
I think it goes back a little bit to what I said around micro inclusions have a macro impact. I think you can apply that to a lot of things in terms of um, kind of incremental nudges or incremental programs, especially now when it feels like we're swimming against, it may feel at times like we're swimming against the tide, is that even small nudges and small programs or embedding things in day-to-day behaviors of senior leaders and managers will continue to have a huge impact on workforce productivity, and the way that people feel at work, which at the end of the day is so incredibly important to productivity, and to keep going at it. And then the second thing I would say, as I've said before, is to continue to lean in on measurement. Again, like what matters gets measured, and the more that you can add in numbers to things, the more credence and credibility I think it brings to the work that we do. So those are the two things that I would continue to tell myself in terms of the micro really does lead to the macro, especially during times like this.
Oh, Sabine, that's great advice you've got there. I know that our listeners are going to be in their notepads taking notes there. It's been a wonderful chat that I've had with you today. Like, I've really enjoyed it. I know you've left us with a lot to think about, a lot of nuggets. And it's clear that PIMCO is on the way forward to creating culture that is truly inclusive and that everyone can really thrive and work towards their full potential with you guys. So it's great to have you share all of that with us today. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much.
And for everyone that's listening, if they want to learn a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing, how can they do that?
Well, they're welcome to visit our PIMCO website for our inclusion and diversity page, of course. And then feel free to drop me a line on my LinkedIn. I always love connecting with new folks.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Sabine, until we speak again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.